Hi everyone, I'm Claire Morneau. I'm CISA's Communications Manager, and I am here today with Addie Rose Holland of Real Pickles, and we are going to be talking fermentation, pickles, all of that good stuff. Addie Rose, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about what Real Pickles is and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So we are a worker cooperative based up in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and we have been making pickles and sauerkraut and kimchi and hot sauces and pickled beets um, with a natural traditional fermentation method for almost 20 years. We've been in business since 2001, and we use vegetables. All our vegetables come from mostly local and definitely within the region. And our region is New England, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. So all our vegetables come from within that region. Most of them come from within 40 miles, and we sell our products only within that region.
Can you do a fermentation 101? Like what are we talking about? What's this category mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fermented vegetables have been is a way of processing and preserving vegetables that's been in practice for thousands of years, and it's actually the original pickling method. And the fermentation relies on naturally occurring microbes that exist in our soil and on healthy vegetables, and those microbes break down the vegetables to produce lactic acid. So it's called lactic acid fermentation, and the lactic acid is what preserves the vegetables. And so similar to vinegar pickles, where the acetic acid is the preservation, with fermented pickles, it's just a different kind of acid or combination of acids. And it's particularly healthy. It's considered a live food. So the food is left raw. There's no pasteurization. And the microbes are most active in the beginning of the fermentation, and then they sort of calm down. And once we decide that it tastes good, that we like the texture and we like the level of sourness, then we'll put them in the fridge, and that really slows down the fermentation. And so that's sort of the background. The sort of health benefits relate to a lot of the compounds that are produced during the fermentation, that are really important for healthy digestion. And a lot has been coming out of the scientific community lately about probiotic foods and the benefit of live microbes in both processing foods and consuming foods. And so these are definitely examples of that there's a major connection between sort of the microbiome of our bodies and certain health benefits that we might enjoy.
Yeah. So you are working with local farms and buying produce from them on their annual cycle, and you're producing a live product that stays in the refrigerator and has a long shelf life, but isn't, permanently preserved. Can you talk a little bit just about your annual cycle and where we're at right now in mid-September in terms of what's happening behind the scenes?
Yeah. So we do all of our starting of fermenting product during the harvest season, because we're using all local fresh vegetables. And so we're getting vegetables in right now from farms, and we're starting barrels. Depending on the product, our cucumber pickles ferment only for a few days, and so we're finished up with that season. That harvest is all done, and we're starting in on our fall crops. So the kimchi and the sauerkraut and the beets and carrots we often do later in the season because those store pretty well, and we can do those in November, December, sometimes even as late as January. And so right now we're in the midst of starting. We're still still trying to catch up with our packing, packing into jars, packing finished ferments into the jars. But the primary focus at this time of year is starting new barrels.
Do you have time to celebrate the end of cucumber season at all, or is it just on to the next thing this time of year?
I'm sure there's some celebration. It's a season that we really enjoy. That I think everyone who is involved with the cucumber production, it's like something really new that is really different from packing product and shredding cabbage and slicing things. I mean, slicing the cucumbers is a very satisfying task, and we all really love when the first batches of cucumbers are ready because they're at their crunchiest, and it's a very exciting time of year.
Yeah. So I want to ask just a little bit about how COVID-19 has affected your business. Something that we're hearing from farms is sort of the timing of the pandemic came in right at the start of the growing season for a lot of them. So it's been a process of learning how to manage this whole new world circumstance as the growing season has been changing and growing and expanding too. And it seems like it's a similar process for you all too. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting and challenging time. And I think for us, in terms of our relationships with our farmers and sort of commitments that we make, back in the winter for the vegetables that we hope to purchase and process, we did have to sort of rethink our production plan a little bit for the season, but we also feel really good that we're able to continue making those significant purchases from the farms that we work with in the Valley, because I know that not all the markets have been the same for those farms. And we did have to pause at the beginning of the pandemic for a few days, and have been sort of adjusting our reality over the course of the last 6 months. We had to sort of reconfigure our production space so that we could operate in a safe and socially distant fashion. And anyone who can work at home has been working at home, which is a blessing to have that opportunity. And yeah, it's certainly been a challenge, but I think we've weathered okay so far. And most of our markets are to farm stands and grocery stores, and so folks have still had access to buy Real Pickles, which has been really great.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's happened for a lot of people at home is that they're spending more time in the kitchen. I feel like earlier this year, before the heat of summer, there was a big, sourdough moment, which is in itself, is that fermented? It is, right?
It is, yeah.
Sourdough is a grain ferment. So I feel like maybe it's time for vegetable ferments to have a home kitchen moment. If people want to experiment at home, do you have tips for people to get started?
Yeah, that's great. We actually just put together a blog post, actually 2 blog posts on do-it-yourself fermenting at home. It's really, really simple. And especially if you have planted a garden this year for the first time, or expanded your garden, or you've got tons of veggies coming in from the CISA. Often this is the time of year when people feel sort of overwhelmed by the amount of vegetables that they feel like they need to eat or process or whatever. And fermentation is a great way to do that. And you can do it in small batches, as small as a pint jar at a time. And so our fermentation manager, Katie, has put together a couple of posts to kind of guide folks through that process. And again, you can do it as small as a pint jar. If you want to do larger quantities, you can do that too. but you can use your leftover Real Pickles jars as your fermentation vessel. And so, you know, she talks in one post about sort of like the recipe and like how much salt to use, how much spices to use, and that kind of thing. And then there's another post that talks about sort of experimenting with flavors and you know, certain spices that work really well, and fresh herbs that work really well, and vegetable combinations that might work better than others. And so it's really a way for folks to you know, dig into the experimentation of it and find recipes that like really work for you. And you know, she mentions that like as you're mixing up your ferment, you might just like taste a little bit. And if you like the fresh combination, it'll be a little saltier than you might make in a salad. But those flavors will, the salts and the spice flavors will sort of mellow in the fermentation. So if you generally like it when it's fresh, you'll probably like it when it's fermented too. And she also talks a little bit about, I think a lot of first-time fermenters are kind of nervous to try that first batch. Like, what if something went wrong? What if I didn't get it right? And so she talks a little bit too about kind of how to taste and check, and you know, if it's a little discolored on top, how to sort of scrape off some of those top layers so that you can get down to the really tasty stuff underneath. Mm-hmm. But it's a pretty generally a pretty safe method of processing vegetables and pickling, and once you kind of get into the groove of it, the possibilities are endless, and it can be a really fun thing to do with all the veggies that are around this time of year.
Yeah, that's great. We can link to that when we post this online. Yeah, I have a former coworker who still teases me about a failed early sauerkraut batch that I made 10 years ago. It was apparently quite memorable. But it didn't crush my enthusiasm for it. So many more successful batches since then. Yeah. And so for people who want to try your products, where can they find them?
Yeah, so in the Pioneer Valley, Greenfield's Market in Greenfield, River Valley Market in Hampton, a lot of the farm stands that are, you know, maybe seasonal or maybe year-round, have our products. Whole Foods in Hadley, Big Y, and several independents, Atkins and Millstone and Foster's in Greenfield.
And people will find them in the refrigerated section, not on the shelf.
That's a great point. It'll be in the refrigerated section. Sometimes they're with like the miso and the yogurt, and sometimes they're in the produce section. So in Big Y, they're in the produce section. So if you don't see them, it's worth asking somebody.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time. I hope that this inspires people to give home fermentation a try or to look for your products in grocery stores.
Yeah.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.